Hi, my name is Diana Wynand, and welcome to the San Fernando Valley Climate Reality chapter. It's going to be a great night. We have a terrific speaker, and you're going to learn an awful lot about native plants and their connection and association with climate. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I am going to turn it over to Christy Pace, who is our Partners and Engagement Coordinator, to give the land acknowledgement this evening. Christy?
Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. We in our land acknowledgement, we just like to first begin by explaining that a land acknowledgement is a formal statement that respects and recognizes Indigenous peoples as the stewards of this land and their enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous people and their traditional territories. In our case, the San Fernando Valley, the unceded land of the Tongva, Tataviam, Kitch, and Chumash people. We acknowledge the history that has brought us to reside on this land and the people who are here with us, walking next to us every day as we work and play and be in nature and steward the land. We invite us to look to them for leadership, to nature for leadership, and listen to the ways in which we can change and do better by the earth. And we ask everyone to acknowledge the history of colonialism that is present in our current neighborhood, cities, and systems. And we call on all of us to be mindful of our own present participation in it, in the way that we move about the land and our systems. And we acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of Tataviam and Chumash tribes. They are here, they are alive and they are your neighbors. Reach out, connect, and honor them. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Sharon, who is going to introduce our guest for the evening. Take it away, Sharon.
Well, we're thrilled to have so many people here tonight because we have a true expert in all things that grow in Southern California, Antonio Sanchez from the Native Plant Nursery run by the Santa Monica Mountains Fund out in Newbury Park. You may also know Antonio as the lead singer of everyone's favorite native plant band, Sage Against the Machine.
Wow.
Go ahead, Antonio.
Thanks, Sharon. Big hug. Thanks for inviting me, Sharon. I appreciate it. This might be the last time you guys have me after you see my talk. But let me see if I can see Sharon real quick. Yeah, I can see her. Cool. Can you give me a thumbs up, Sharon? We good? Okay, cool. Right on. How long do I have, Sharon? This is where I insert my joke that I'm gonna take to like 11. But
we were hoping that you would be short, so there's lots of time to ask questions. So like keep it to 45 minutes.
Well, that's gonna be hard. You know me, Sharon. I can keep it to 4 hours and 45 minutes. I'm just joking.
If we could start questions, if we could start our questions at around 8 o'clock, because we'll have to switch gears to the rest of the business around 8:15, 8:20.
Perfect.
Then
Let's do it. That's 8 a.m., right? Good to go. All right. And the coffee is beginning. So there it is. Again, I'm going to hype up this native plant fair that we're going to be a part of. I'm lucky enough to work in the Santa Monica Mountains right now. And Sharon is a volunteer of ours. She took a native plant horticulture training program that we offered for free. And and thank you for connecting with me, Sharon. Whenever I get asked to do something, I'm like, I wonder how many people she asked before that said no. And so I'm going to say over under about 3 people, just because I'm in a Super Bowl gambling mood. So before I start any lecture, workshop, whatever I'm going to call this, I need to give thanks to, and this is never a complete list, but to the people who have helped me not just produce this workshop, this talk, but have helped me learn what I've learned. I've worked at, I think, all of these spots. I used to work at, so I began my native plant or my plant journey over 15 years ago, working at farms, and organic farms, biodynamic farms, small farms, family farms, etc. Then my first native plant job was at California Nursery up north in Santa Rosa when I was studying sustainable agriculture in Santa Rosa. I used to work at, one of the oldest native plant nurseries in Burbank, right there in Sun Valley, Theodore Payne Foundation. Me and my primo, my cousin, used to own and operate Nopalito Native Plant Nursery. We did that for 4 years in Ventura County. I used to run the nursery at Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden, now called California Botanic Garden. I used to work as a landscaper at Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. I love the folks at Chia Cafe who are doing amazing work with white sage and other native foods and native tribal traditions in Southern California. There's just so many folks that I'm super, super thankful for. And if I don't put your name on here, it's not because I'm not thankful. I just, yeah. And I want to hype up where I work right now at the Santa Monica Mountains. I don't work for the parks. I'm not a park ranger or anything. I do work for a nonprofit called the Santa Monica Mountains Fund. And as of now, I'm only on contract until next fall, so till next August. And I want to invite you guys to help us. And I'll show you a little bit of what we're doing at the parks and why you might want to help us. But we do offer free classes, and we offer events where you guys can come in and help us grow plants or even install plants and restoration projects that we have. Everything you can find online, just like it is all the time now, right here. And like Sharon said, we're going to send this out to you guys if you want. So you can just type in SAMO Fund, Eventbrite, and all of our free events will come up. And you can email me directly if you want to bring like a Boy Scout group. We have a group of 5th graders coming tomorrow. We have 90 5th graders coming tomorrow. We have about 22 2nd and 3rd graders coming on Thursday. To me, conservation, restoration, none of this is important without involving community. They're one and the same. So the more folks we can get out there, the better. And like Sharon said, this is really cool that things are happening. And they've been happening for years, but it's kind of neat. On Sunday, we're inviting folks out to Tarzana, like Miles said. And on Saturday, if you guys are interested, we're doing almost the exact same thing. It's kind of funny that these are the first annual events and they got organized on the same weekend, which is weird. But anyways, we're doing one in Oxnard, my hometown. And the band that I get to just yell in front of, Sage Against the Machine, will be playing. But more importantly than that, we're going to be doing native plant workshops on seed bombs, milkweed and monarchs, etc. Maybe I should get to what I was here invited to talk about. So let's get into the climate change topic and how native plants are being affected and how maybe they can help stop climate change and how they're going to adapt to climate change. So I'm going to show you guys this slide and the next slide, which is what you guys can stop doing at the end. So you guys don't have to write any of this down. And for me, this is just a list that I came up with. And just let me make what's it called when there's a book and like in the very beginning, let me tell you this. I didn't finish school. I don't have an AA. I don't have a bachelor's. I don't have any of that. My experience has been just earned from grinding, from having to pay my bills 7 days a week with native plants, from having to cry for having to, close down a native plant nursery, for just laughing, loving, and actually singing with these plants. And so I'm lucky enough to know a lot of, scientists, a lot of plant, doctorates. I was going to say the only doctor I know is Dr. Seuss, but I'm like, oh, that's not that good a joke. That's kind of But I did talk to a few plant scientists, no climate scientists for this talk, but I wanted to get a sense from them what they were seeing out in the field, whether it's out in Joshua Tree, whether it's out in the hills of San Bernardino Mountains, whether it's out in Angeles National Forest, out in past Santa Barbara. And I heard a lot of the same stuff. And a lot of it's really depressing. So I don't need to hit you with some of that. But along with that, just realizing how we can be more sustainable. And by sustainable, I mean producing less inputs or using less inputs in our garden and in our way of life, and how that can affect possibly, help reduce the impact of climate change. So I'll show you guys this list again. It's a list that I came up with, looking at other websites and talking to other folks. And it's not a complete list, but it's a list that I think is very easy to start. And so I'll just go over it real quick. And looks like maybe Steve could mute himself, por favor. With native plants or with your gardens, I would love for you all to use at least 50% local adapted native plants. I'll get into what a local adapted native plant is. So no more redwoods. The redwoods are gorgeous, but no more water sucking redwoods that really need fog to be happy. I'm going to encourage you guys to fertilize with compost that you can make in your own home. What that does is it reduces the amount of trash that you're producing. And we know that landfills are one of the biggest, producers of methane in the world. And so if we can reduce what we're throwing away by making our own compost, and native plants happen to love compost, because if you guys know anything about native plants, a lot of folks say don't fertilize native plants. And I agree with most of that. You wouldn't want to fertilize a native plant with a high nitrogen, high potassium, high phosphorus type of fertilizer that you might do a rose or a tomato with, but they love compost. And I'll show you guys how to do that and when to do that. You want to plant most or all of your plants in November and March. And this might sound goofy. How does that help climate change? So if you guys have ever been in a marathon or ever run a marathon, you train for that marathon. You're running miles and miles before the actual marathon, right? You don't train for the marathon during the marathon. So what we do when we water and we plant our plants in the winter is the water that we apply to our plants in the winter is worth so much more than water that we apply to our plants during the summer, right? During the winter, it's cold. Usually it's cooler, even though it's about to hit 90 in a few days. But for the most part, we have wet, sometimes wet winters. We have colder soil, and the water that we put in the ground stays there longer. Even if it's hot, the days are shorter. And so we find that when we install and when we plant plants during the winter, that for me is November to March, we get so much more bang for our buck. It's so much more useful than using water during the summer or installing new plants during the summer. And right next to that is to install young plants. So plants that are only 6 months old, a year old, and in a nursery pot that's going to be about a 4-inch pot or a 1 gallon, compared to buying these huge 5 gallons, these 2 gallons, and these 15 gallons. What does that mean for climate change or for resources? If you guys have never worked at a nursery, the amount of resources that it takes to produce a 2-gallon plant, a 5-gallon plant, a 15-gallon plant, forget about the transportation that it takes to ship that heavy wet plant from Carpinteria or from out in the desert out to Home Depot in LA. All the fertilizer that goes into it, all the water that goes into it, usually pesticides as well. There's some of those plants sit on tables and benches for 2 to 4 years to get to these sizes. So the smaller plants we can install, the less resources we're going to use. And the good news is you can grow a lot of these small plants in your own garden. I would like to encourage you guys to always eat from your garden when possible, whether it's native or non-native. Oops, let me go back right here. I want to encourage you all to keep parts of your garden deadheaded. I'll explain what that is when we get to the plants. And flexible, I'll explain what that is as well, for longer blooms. When we have more blooms, that usually means more pollinators. Now, sometimes we want to leave dead blooms, so dried flowers and seed, out for birds and all those things. And I'll explain kind of how I go about deciding when to leave which seed and which dead flowers, right? But if we can water, if we can deadhead our plants and keep them flowering just a little bit longer, we can usually keep the pollinators around a little bit longer as well. I want to encourage you guys at the most to water 2 to 3 times a month during the dry season, right? There's no need to use more than that water during the dry season, and the dry season being May to October. I also want to encourage you all, as we talk about climate change, to not forget that we have, I believe, maybe some of you all don't believe, but I believe that we have spirit and we have a connection to our land and to these plants. Don't forget that we're doing this not just to help fight climate change, but to make a connection to Southern California. And what better way to make connection to Southern California than to plant plants that belong here and that have a story behind them, right? And we know that it takes about 20 years for a tree to start sequestering carbon, right? It takes, I'll give you an example. Our native oaks like Quercus agrifolia or Platanus racemosa, which is our sycamores, they take about 10 to 15 years to get to reproductive age. And that's the age, from what I read, about 15 to 20 years to when a mature tree starts taking in that carbon instead of using more carbon. So the best thing we can do, one of the best things we can do, is preserve all of these old habitats that we have, where we have old intact oaks, where we have old intact riparian habitats in these communities, right? So instead of chopping down trees, whether they're native or not, we should be trying to keep them in our neighborhoods. And I would encourage you guys to connect as much as you can. If you yourself are tribal, you probably already have those connections. And if you're not, I would encourage you to connect with as many of these folks as you can, and it makes sense to. And there's a ton more that are on this list. And I'll share this list with you guys at the end. So things you can stop doing, and I hate telling people to stop doing stuff, but you can stop using lawns. You can stop using high input plants. High input plants are things that take a lot from us. They take water, they take lawnmowers, which we know how bad those are for the environment. They take fertilizer. We can stop using those. And an easy way to tell if a plant is high input is if it dies. If you water a plant 3 times a month during the summer and it still needs more water, that's a high input plant. We can stop using plants that need all these chemical fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides. I hardly ever use any of those with native plants or with low input food plants like pineapple guava, low input food plants like mulberries, low input landscape plants like rosemary or lavenders. Very rarely do they ever need any of those things. We can definitely stop using invasive plants. I'll show you all how to figure out if a plant is invasive. We can stop using these large plants that have been sitting in nurseries, putting nitrogen into oceans for years, wasting water for years, and wasting gas to haul huge plants to nurseries. So the smaller, the better. We can stop planting during the hottest time of the year because those plants are just wasting water. We could have waited till the winter, or we could have done it earlier. You want to plant, when the first time you plant or the first time you water a plant, you want to give it at least 2 gallons of water, which is a ton of water. But if you don't give your plants that much water, they tend to suffer. And I'll show you a picture of a professional landscape company killing plants by not giving them enough water when they're young. So we want to give our plants enough water when they're young. And that's why we recommend planting from November to March. You guys should stop guessing how much water your plants will need. It's amazing. Farmers do this all the time. They just turn on water to blueberries. They're like, I think they need water every 2 or 3 days. Let's just turn it on. UC, the Agriculture Extension, the UC Agriculture Extension did some research on blueberry farmers, because blueberry farmers wanted to know how much to water. They were just watering. And they found out that blueberry farmers in the Central Valley were watering twice as much as they needed to. Just because as a farmer, you don't want your plant to die. And the easiest thing to do is just to give it more water. And the plant was taking it. Just because the plant takes it doesn't mean it needs it. So I would encourage you all to really figure out how much water your plant needs to stop wasting that resource. And we should stop, whether we're landscapers ourselves, or if we landscape our own gardens, or if we have landscapers that help us out, I would encourage them to stop using these gas powered leaf blowers and other heavy polluting and disruptive small tools. Imagine, I don't know if you guys, I live in an apartment, and when these guys come around, God bless them, with their leaf blowers, and if you're still sleeping, those are disruptive. Imagine if you're a little hummingbird trying to raise your baby in a little shrub. That's like a midnight party in Oxnard, where Saturday night, where the banda is just turned up. It is rough for hummingbirds. So not only are we polluting the air, but we're disrupting wildlife, right? We want the wildlife to feel at home in our gardens. And so the louder and more disruptive we are, the less we're going to welcome them. So I want to, so the first experience, I think the first real deep experience I had with climate change and California native plants was here in the Santa Monica Mountains. I met a volunteer of ours named Michelle. She's such a sweetheart. She's just a great woman who is fascinated with the monarch butterfly. You guys probably know what the monarch butterflies are. And some of you probably know that they only use milkweed to lay their eggs on, and their babies will only eat milkweed. I don't know why it is. That's all they'll eat. It doesn't matter to the caterpillar. It doesn't matter if it's tropical, non-native milkweed or local milkweed. They just love milkweed. And so Michelle got us into this program where we started recruiting interns And we thought, hey, we can get interns to help us collect milkweed for the monarchs and start growing it. Cool. But we didn't know about how climate change was affecting milkweed or monarchs until we started getting invited into some of these calls from counties, county groups like the Reservation District, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, state parks, some folks from national parks, and they started, they've been doing this for years. And the thing that's just out there loud is that was pretty cool right there, is that the monarchs are waking up a little bit earlier. And it's not very much earlier. It's about 2 to 4 weeks earlier. Traditionally, they're going to wake up about March 10th, March 15th to kind of late March, right? And that is when this guy, if you guys can see my cursor, that's when Asclepias fascicularis or narrow-leaf milkweed tends to wake up. And it used to be a perfect partnership. The narrow-leaf milkweed would wake up at that time. The monarchs would lay their eggs, and bam, the caterpillars would wake up, start grubbing this, and then they'd get fat enough, they'd hang out for a week and then become monarchs, and then they'd go on their way up north, hang out. Maybe the first generation would hang out here, then start heading up north. It's a beautiful story. But what happens when the plants or the monarchs are waking up just a few weeks earlier? Does it really make a difference? And we know that this Asclepias fascicularis just does not come up traditionally in February or early March. It's really hard to find. But the good thing is, if we want to call it good news, is that Asclepias californica, which also occurs in our mountains. I don't think I made that clear. We have 3 milkweeds in our mountains, and Asclepias californica is one of them. And the good news is that this guy does occur in our mountains, and we have old records that this guy can come up as early as March, flowering. And so if a plant's flowering in March, that's usually a good sign that a few weeks earlier, the stems and the leaves, which is what the monarch butterfly uses, the monarch caterpillar uses, was available in February. And so on all these calls with all these, folks from Fish and Wildlife and everything, we're making a push to identify these populations in the park, these populations all across the state. And the only bad news is that this guy is hard to grow. I'm going to go back. This is Asclepias fascicularis. This thing is a weed. Anyone can grow this. You can just put a few seed in the soil as long as it has water and as long as it has heat. That's what it wants. And so that makes sense that it kind of wakes up in March 15th. It's kind of breaking dormancy. That's kind of the last frost date here in California or Southern California. And so that one's super easy to grow. And we can find thousands of locations of it in Southern California. It's very, very common. But Asclepias californica, unfortunately, there's very few populations. I think in the Santa Monica Mountains, we may have found 5 locations for this plant. There are a lot more locations and populations of it up north as you head up north, kind of where the monarchs fly. But locally, there's such a small amount of just individuals. And so we were lucky enough to write a grant, and we saw that we wanted to address this issue, right? And these are the 3 different milkweeds. So, and these are the times that they traditionally come up, not flower. This is the time that they're traditionally up for caterpillars to eat. So April to August, you can see straight spring and summer. Another one is Aerocarpa, which we also have very few populations of, April to August. And then we did some research on old collections that were done even in the 1800s. And we saw a few tiny, tiny patterns that we could see Asclepias californica coming up in March. And so we wrote a grant, and we were lucky enough to receive that grant and hire 2 young women to basically identify populations in the park of Asclepias californica, Asclepias aerocarpa, and collect the seed. And we were lucky enough to collect about 2,000 to 3,000 seed of each species, which sounds like nothing. It sounds like a tiny amount, but for us, it's a start. And what we're going to do with those seed is we're going to take them through a bunch of germination trials, because we don't really know how to grow it. We're on all these calls, and a lot of folks don't know how to grow it very well. That other weedy milkweed is super easy to grow. These 2, for whatever reason, are a little harder. They like cold, so we have to send them through cold for about 6 to 8 weeks. We have a feeling that some of them might like smoke. I don't think they're fire followers, but they may need some sort of liquid smoke. And then to germinate, once they germinate, they seem to have a taproot, and they want to almost grow underground the first year and not so much above ground. We have a lot of work to do with that species, but that's what we're doing at the park to not combat climate change so much with plants, but we're seeing that this insect is being affected by climate change and a whole bunch of other things, loss of habitat, pesticide use, etc. And so we're doing another conference this year. This is our second time we're doing the Southern California Monarch and Milkweed Conference. We'll have a bunch of speakers giving updates on the latest counts for monarchs. We'll have updates on these two milkweeds that I just talked about the search for them around Southern California, and the success and the failures that we've had germinating those, and why we're trying to get those out to the public and to restorationists. And I'm happy to announce that March 19th is a day of action. And so I would encourage you guys, we can send this out to your group to show you all the locations, but we're going to have locations in Ventura, in Oxnard, in San Diego, in Riverside, where we're going to send folks out to go do restoration, whether it's just to get free seed, whether it's to pull weeds, whether it's to plant milkweed. And so this is the one that I'm most intimately involved with, and I can see Sharon. So Sharon, I want to skip real quick and just go to, is this my email? I want to go to, can you see these pictures, Sharon? Cool. So I want to show you the work that we've done at the park. When I got here, we had one intern, and we had nothing to do with any climate change, with any, we were just collecting plants to help restore what was affected after some of the fires in the parks. And so we were able to hire these two young ladies and collect thousands, hundreds of thousands of seed, and invite all of these volunteers to come work with us. And there's some volunteers working with us. We've also been able to work with school children making seed bombs. And every time we get to touch a child, I mean, not physically, but every time that we get to interact with the child, we have this monarch and milkweed gospel. We tell them that the monarchs are being affected by climate change, that the milkweed we have a chance to help the monarchs with this local milkweed. And so we go out to events like Ciclavia, which is part in LA, where they shut down some of the streets, and we show them this pledge. We ask folks to take this pledge to help the monarchs and to plant local milkweed. We hand out milkweed plants. We did this in Spanish and English as well. And so I'm super proud of this program that we've created to involve the public. And we have this questionnaire or this little circle where you get free seed if you can do like a milkweed dance or answer a question. And then we actually do the restoration in ground, right? And to me, it's super important that we involve the public. And here you can see this picture there. They've cut the dried stalks. Like I said, the monarch or the specific milkweed wants to go to sleep during the winter. And so it leaves these dead stems above ground. And traditionally, a lot of native folks around California use this as for bracelets, for necklaces, as basically a source for rope. And so we show folks how to do it because it's super meaningful that we connect that if that story still exists. So you can see us here using this plant for fiber, and then here's the seed, and there's our boys right there. And so we're super excited. And that's an upside down picture at one of our events. So let me go back to this PowerPoint real quick. You see, that's not it. If you guys know me, you know how bad I am at technology. So let me get in here real quick. Cool. So how have plants adapted in the past to climate change? We know that there's a bunch of ways that plants have been affected. And the good news is that plants have a really good track record of adapting to climate change. The only problem is it's been slowly, right? It's been over 5,000 years, 10,000 years, over 20,000 years. And right now it looks like we're shoving our plants to adapt in 10 years and 50 years and 100 years. So the question is going to be, will they be able to adapt? So we know in the past that some plants have moved north sometimes. If you guys look at rainfall totals and weather conditions, just compared from LA up to San Francisco, we know that it rains almost twice as much sometimes up in Northern California as it does Southern California. And in certain parts of Northern California, the weather can be a lot more mild. Sometimes the plants will move upslope. We can go from 1,000-foot elevation for a buckwheat up to 3,000-foot elevation. And if you all have ever lived in the mountains or visited the mountains on a hot July day, you know it's like 20 degrees cooler sometimes up there, especially up in those pine forests. It's so nice. And so we know that that's how a lot of plants move to adapt. Some of the plants too will just adapt in place if possible, right? They'll become smaller. They will tolerate the heat that's coming, or the cold or the wetness. So they don't necessarily have to move. They just might change and adapt to the new conditions. Some plants are going to have to find new pollinators. So we may have butterflies or moths go extinct, and new pollinators and new moths and new butterflies might come in, or as they move up north or they move east into cool areas, they might encounter new pollinators. But more importantly, new ways of distributing seed. A lot of native plants distribute their seed by wind, some of them by animal. And so what happens if that animal ceases to exist, or if there's fire and this plant's not used to fire? So we might see, or we have seen in the past, some plants adapt as to how they're being distributed. And then we know that some plants just aren't able to adapt, and they might have covered counties, dozens of counties. This wouldn't have been in the past because there were no counties in the past, but just large, acreage. And now they only exist in a tiny, tiny area. Probably my favorite example is Quercus tomentella, which is island oak. It's a beautiful oak tree that's only found on the Channel Islands, and then one island in Baja California. I think it's Guadalupe Island. But there's fossil records of that plant existing about 500,000 to 1 million years ago here in mainland California. And it must have been beautiful to see that plant just up and down California. But because of climate change, we know that guy has shifted basically to just tiny little kind of cool, foggy, wetter sections of the islands on Channel Island. And so knowing that, how do we expect our plants at this time to evolve and to adapt and sometimes to disappear with climate change? We know the worst news is for the stuff that there's small populations of, like the Joshua trees, like Eriogonum crocatum, which is conejo buckwheat. Some of these plants that are rare or extinct might become more rare. Not plants that are rare extinct, but some of these plants that are rare or have very, very small distribution areas, they might become more rare, or they might just go extinct, unfortunately. We believe that plants with large populations probably won't go extinct. They most likely will shrink. Their footprint's probably going to shrink just a little bit, but in some cases, their footprint actually might get bigger. And Celia farinosa, which is brittle bush, which is from the desert, might be an example of that. And Celia farinosa is found Riverside County out towards Phoenix. It's a desert rat. Caltrans started using it probably 20, 30 years ago, maybe even longer, to hydroseed on the 10. You guys can see it all over the freeways out towards Pasadena. And that thing just took over, and it loves it out here in Southern California. And so it's not native to this area, but we might see plants start to extend their footprint as others their footprints start to decrease. We also think that invasive plants are going to start to take over really, really fast. And part of that is because as plants go extinct, maybe it's through fire or through drought, there's going to be some fast moving plants that come in. It's basically like when COVID happened and people were making masks really quick. Who came in first? Whoever was able to make those masks the quickest. And unfortunately, there's some native plants that are really good at taking over open spaces. And so we think with more fires, with more drought, and less native plants reproducing, we think some of these invasive plants are going to take over super, super fast. It's already happening in the desert. We see the desert going on fire a lot more often than it used to. And a lot of it's because these annual weedy grasses are taking over in the desert, and they're basically acting as tinder just to go, from plant to plant, from creosote bush to creosote bush. So we know plants are not going to be able to reproduce if they have less than ideal conditions. So if it's way too hot, and these guys the drought just happens too often. If a little baby seed germinates and it just gets too intensely hot and there's no rain, then we're going to find that these guys aren't able to make new populations. And we already see it happening in the desert and in some pinon pine areas as well. We know that some of our plants are unfortunately going to lose pollinators and ways to disperse seed because of habitat loss, because of fires, etc. And we're going to see that plants have no way to move into areas if that area is all developed. I think a good example is Eriogonum crocatum, which again is Conejo buckwheat, which is only found in Newbury Park and Camarillo, basically, just tiny little spots, maybe Thousand Oaks, just in these little spots. And if there's nowhere to move because it's full of farms and it's full of housing tracts, then that plant might just be gone. The good news is that we think a lot of native annuals and a lot of quick flowering perennials are going to be able to quickly adapt, right? So take California poppy, for example. California poppy can flower the first year. It can make babies the first year. And that first year, we'll remember kind of the climate and it will be in the genetics for that year. The next year, if it wakes up and it produces flowers and then seed again, it will start to remember, right, what this new climate is like. And so those plants that are able to reproduce and produce seed faster are probably going to be super successful here in California as far as native plants go. And those that take 20 to 40 to 60 years to produce just one crop, like an oak tree, maybe will move a lot slower. And so as we move into plants, I love to use this map or these maps from CalFlora. This is from a nonprofit website, CalFlora. And if you guys don't know CalFlora, I would love for you guys to support them if you can afford it. They do amazing work mapping populations and just making this data available to a lot of us who work with just native plants around California. And so I'm looking for plants, as we're going to recommend stuff that will be resilient, that can handle these heat waves, that can handle these droughts, that can handle maybe more intense rains like we just had about 5 weeks ago. Maybe those are going to come more often. And so what I look for in a plant that is adaptable is that it occurs in all of these areas. If you guys can see my cursor, all these blue dots are natural populations. I would say over 95% of these blue dots are natural occurring populations of this plant. And this is Epilobium canum. This is one of the plants that I recommend for a rougher Southern California gardening experience. This guy is used liberally in the desert, and they even use it in Phoenix right now. But you could see a really closely related species of this guy, Epilobium Septetronaut. I love this plant. The first time I ever saw this plant, I fell in love with it and I wanted to grow it. I bought it from a nursery, I grew it, and I immediately killed it. And I bought it again, and I realized that it doesn't want clay soil. Look at where this guy is native to. So this guy is native to a much smaller range than what Epilobium canum is. If you guys can see the difference. And so it makes sense. Happier in Northern California, up here by the coast, probably upper elevation, maybe in granite, really well draining soil. And this guy's really hard to grow in Southern California. It's really hard to produce these conditions, right? Which is more water, cooler weather usually than here in Southern California. And so we'll find that stuff that occurs in these diverse areas, all these different niches, is usually a lot easier to grow and will probably handle climate change and a lot hotter city than these other plants that are found in these really distinct areas. And so probably the easiest sage of the bushy sages in California to grow is black sage. And you can see the natural distribution for black sage right here. And that's pretty wide for a California sage. And then you can see Mojave Sage, which is way up here. And I've tried to grow Mojave Sage, and I did even worse with it than that Epilobium Septetronaut. This thing wants sand, it wants rock, it wants 100-degree weather. It doesn't want clay soil. It doesn't want wet clay during the winter, which is what a lot of our plants get if it rains too much or if we water too much. Whereas black sage is super easy, super adaptable, and we can grow that even in Riverside County. And so when I first was thinking about, a hotter climate, I just thought, oh, well, let's just grow desert plants. And that's me being uneducated and me just trying to find an easy solution. And if we look at 3 distinct areas, we can see that they're way different, and why we shouldn't treat LA like a desert. So we go to LA, We can see the LA usually gets its rain November to March in about 14 inches historically. That's what our average is. If we go to Riverside, which a lot of people would consider the beginning of the desert region, at least close to LA, they still get their rain. If you look historically, most of their rain is in the winter, November to March. Those are the heavy rain months. But if we go to Phoenix, which only gets about, on average, about 9 inches of rain a year, they have 2 wet periods, and they're about the same. They get about the same. So they get about 4 inches in the winter, December to March, and they get about 4 inches during the summer, which are those beautiful monsoons. And there's also differences in soil. There's differences in heat intensity, right? Phoenix is way, way more intensely hot than Pasadena or even Riverside. There's a lot more fog that we get in Southern California compared to Phoenix. We have different pollinators and ways for pollinators and animals to distribute seed. There's so many other factors that would probably suggest we shouldn't just start using hot weather adapted plants. We shouldn't just go to Phoenix, to Vegas, and to Barstow and just start putting stuff that exclusively grows there, because we need all the other things that come with it: soil, pollinators, etc. So a good solution for me is to find a plant that occurs here in Southern California, but also occurs in the desert. And one of my favorites, this is one of my top 3 plants in the whole native plant world, is Bladder Pod. And I love Bladder Pod. You can see it in this picture next to creosote bush. I grew up in El Paso, Texas. This is what the desert smells like when it rains. It smells like creosote bush. I've seen this plant right next to the ocean, basically getting saltwater spray by Magoo. And so we have a plant that can tolerate basically heavy fog and 62-degree Malibu mornings. But we also have the same genetics. The exact same plant can tolerate creosote bush, 110-degree weather. These are the plants that I think are super, super pliable, super, super adaptable, and I think will be very, very successful. They're already successful now, but will probably be very successful in our landscapes as our landscapes start to change. And so before I recommend any plants, I want to make you guys aware of this beautiful website called Plant Right. Let me make sure I can share it correctly. Is Sharon still here? Yeah, let me see if I can get a thumbs up from Sharon here. Let's see, that's the wrong one. Can you see my screen, Sharon? Can you see the Plant Right? Yeah? No? Okay. Let me share this again. Can you see that? Okay, cool. So I would encourage you all, if you're into it, to check out this website called plantright.org. It's part of the CALIPSI, California Invasive Plant Council, and it's an excellent plant list highlighting invasive plants. There's a lot of them. And instead of getting into stuff that's too negative, I want to show you guys some of the positives. They have a list down here of stuff that the nursery industry has retired. And so they've gotten basically the nursery industry to stop growing some of these really, really invasive plants. To us, an invasive plant is a plant that you plant and it starts reseeding, not just in your neighbor's yard because there's water from the lawn, but it starts going across the street. It starts going into wildland areas, and it usually starts taking over open areas. And we can see these French and Spanish brooms everywhere. We can see so many of these grasses everywhere. And I'm not against non-native plants at all. I love non-native plants. We should plant them, but we should not plant these invasive ones, especially when they are huge, huge fire dangers in our wildlands. So if we're trying to protect our older trees, our older woodlands, because we know that they can be carbon sinks, the last thing we want to do is encourage plants that will make them burn every 5 to 10 years. And so the cool thing about Plant Right is that you can find a plant that you love, like green fountain grass, and don't lie, I know you have it in your garden right now, and this is what you can plant instead. And they have other alternatives if you click here. If you like Mexican feathergrass, stop planting it. It is becoming weedy, and it is a really good way to start a fire. And so there's there's these lists that if you guys have any questions about whether they'll be weedy or not, that I would suggest you check out. And as always, I would love you all to to support CALIPSI, California Invasive Plant Council. The work that they do is amazing, and we use it, in the parks. At least I use it a lot when we're doing work and recommending plants to people. Can you see my PowerPoint again, Sharon? Cool. And there's some great work being done by the doctorates and the horticulture experts in the UC system. UC Davis Arboretum is probably leading the way, the folks at UC Davis. And so they came up with this list about 12 years ago of UC Davis Arboretum All-Stars. And they saw the need for plants that were not invasive, that could tolerate clay soils, 100+ degree weather in the Sacramento Valley. They need to look good for folks. So they look good 3 out of 4 seasons, and they need to be low water. So we want low input plants that are not going to be fire dangers, that can handle our clay soils, which is where most of our houses are these days. And so they came up with a great list. I'm not going to go over the list here, but I would encourage you all to look at that list, because if you don't want to do just native, there's plenty of non-native plants that are amazing on that list. It's 100 plants, and there's probably about 30 native plants on there, and the rest are non-native. And so here's some of my favorite landscaping tips. I will go over these at the end, but I want to show you guys favorite landscaping tips, and they coincide with us just using less resources in our garden, is to water during the winter and water less during the summer, and to plant small plants. I can't tell you how many resources go into a plant that has been in a nursery for 2 years. It would scare you guys. And so here's what happens when you plant as a landscape professional. You plant a nursery plant in the summer, like I asked you not to, and you put it on drip system with I would rather you not, and you don't water by hand the first time. So this is a bunch of Salvia Bees Bliss. This is right across the street from our park. And you can see all the dead spots. You can see my cursor, all the dead spots where this plant died. This was planted right about mid-August, early September, right at the height. And so they planted it, they put a drip system on. And what happens with the drip system is the water doesn't get under the plant. When you don't get water under a plant and you have dry soil in August and September, the plant immediately shrinks and it dies. And what happened here is that these guys, these landscapers, took the easy way out. And these agaves, attenuata, were not there before. These agaves, they stuck in the places where their plants died. And so now we have this beautiful local, well, kind of local sage that was going to feed pollinators and be a really good low water plant. And instead, now we have these agave attenuatas, which offers some habitat for wildlife, but it wasn't what the landscape designer originally wanted. And so you really want to try to follow a lot of these rules about planting in the winter, watering 2 gallons the first time you plant, to have success. And even, sometimes the professionals can't get it right. So what will our local plants be dealing with in about 10 to 20 years as climate change gets more intense? We know that it's going to be hotter longer. It's probably going to be hotter earlier. We're going to have less winter rain. I even think there might be some more summer rain. Have you guys felt how, like 2 years ago during the summer, it felt like we were having monsoons for a little bit? There was about 2 or 3 rains, monsoonal rains. I don't know much about climate. I don't know much about how, monsoons are formed, but it felt like those hot summer rains. And if you look back at LA, we just traditionally don't get those wet summer rains. So who knows, we might be getting some more summer rain. There might be more flooding during the winter. I know we had some heavy flooding at the nursery this year with all that water. Our highs are going to be higher and our lows are going to be lower. We're going to have more frequent wildfires, and there might be less pollinators around and less way for our plants to move around. And so what plants can we use in our landscape, and what do we sometimes start using for restoration to know that our plants are going to be resilient? They're going to make it through all these changes. And so there's the first one, is Bladder Pod. And I already told you guys why I love this plant. It's one of my top 3 favorite plants. It does flower for at least 6 months out of the year without you doing anything to it. It can flower almost all year with you doing something to it. And that something is pruning it lightly and giving it a little water. All it needs is about 2 to 3 times a month. And it keeps it very flexible. The hummingbirds love it. It's even edible. It's related to capers, so you guys can use it to prepare a local caper. And this is one of the plants that we'll be giving away at Tarzana. This is like one of my passion projects, is to get milkweed out there, to get bladder pod out there, to get a lot of our long blooming native plants out there that are adaptable to heat. So I adore this plant, and I think it's a really good choice for our landscapes going forward. California buckwheat, look at this distribution. This thing is there. Basically, wherever there's a Sanchez in California, this guy is there. This guy is adaptable. This guy's super easy to grow. You can see it in the desert. You can see it, on the coast, on the islands. And we know it's really hard to overwater. That's the hard thing with some of our plants. Some people water them too much, which kind of sounds goofy for a low water plant, but that's usually what kills our plants, is people watering too much. And so this guy doesn't mind extra water, but he definitely doesn't need it. It's a great pollinator plant, bees, butterflies, moths, etc. And it flowers late too. It starts flowering about June or July, and then it flowers late. And we're thinking that the monarchs may be coming back later as well. And so we may be looking for late flowering pollinators due to climate change. So maybe some of the insects are coming back earlier or later. The earlier we have covered, the late is where we might not have color. So buckwheats are excellent late flowering pollinator plants. Another great one is Mexican elderberry. You can see the distribution and how easy this is to grow. It's a very easy plant to grow. You can grow this dry, or you can grow it wet next to a stream. It really doesn't matter. Can get about 8 to 30 feet tall. The reason I love this plant is because it starts to connect us to California. We can use the wood to make musical instruments. We can use the berries for medicine. We can use the berries for food. When this plant flowers about April, May, you guys can hear the plant. There's so much damn wildlife on this plant, and it feeds birds. And so you need to water it very little to get a good elderberry crop out of this. And so I think it's a great plant to get your family or yourself into using plants. And I say using respectfully, right? To using plants for more than just a pretty thing in your garden, right? This is a really cool interactive plant. Toyon is another plant that I love. If you have Toyon and elderberry, you got flowers so much of the year. Toyon flowers when elderberry is fruiting, right? And so you'll have flowers June, July, maybe even in August. And then you'll have Toyon berries, which are edible. They're not amazing, but they are edible. Usually folks dry them or make jelly out of them, or add them to yogurt with honey or whatnot. But it's a really easy plant to grow, and it's a super useful plant. You can use it as a hedge. You can use it as a screen. It can tolerate shade. It can tolerate full sun. It's on the UC Davis Arboretum All-Star list. It's great for holiday decorations with those red berries. So super adaptable plant, tolerant of 100 degrees plus, and just excellent local plant to be using. Here's that California fuchsia again. You can see this distribution of California fuchsia. And we know that, I know people in Phoenix who use it. It's a super easy to grow plant. Hummingbirds love these tubular plants. It's a big hummingbird magnet during the summer. It flowers usually July, August, and September. This is another UC Davis Arboretum All-Star. This is a newer plant that came on the market about 10 years ago. This is Valley Violet. The reason I like this one is this is small, and our gardens are usually getting smaller, not bigger. And so it's a small ceanothus, and it flowers early. It's flowering right now. If you guys go out to see it, it's flowering right now. And so we consider this an early pollinator plant. So if monarchs and other plants or other pollinators are waking up earlier, or sometimes there's evidence that they're not even going to sleep. We think that there's a lot more urban monarchs these days too. We want there to be food for them. And this is a spectacular butterfly plant, the ceanothus, and it's small, flowers early. It's a great plant. Deergrass, a really good landscape plant, easy to do in full sun. They use this in Phoenix like crazy. You can use it in part shade, grows full sun or full size in about 2 years. Really, really cool plant. Yeah, I like this plant a lot too. Ribes aureum, this is probably my favorite food plant, just because I think it's the easiest to grow and the easiest to eat. Also on the UC Davis Arboretum All-Star list. It flowers early, so this guy flowers usually around Christmas. So if we're trying to feed pollinators that maybe don't go to sleep or are waking up earlier, this is a perfect plant for that. It also produces great sweet fruits for humans or for birds. Really cool plant that tolerates part shade and full sun. I love that plant. We give that. That's another plant that we're going to be giving out for free at Tarzana is the golden currant. Narrowleaf milkweed. We can't say enough about our local milkweeds. We need to plant more milkweed. Whenever you plant milkweed, I want to encourage you guys to plant a minimum of 7 milkweeds. Starting in March with our native plant or with our Monarch Day of Action, we're going to be giving out seeds, and we give out enough seed to grow 7 plants. And the reason we give out that much seed is when a monarch finds a plant, she will lay the eggs on that plant. And if you only have 1 milkweed, you will probably kill your caterpillars. I get the calls or emails every year. Hey, do you have extra milkweed? I have too many caterpillars. I ask them, how many plants do you have? Oh, I have 2 plants. You need to plant more plants. It's like inviting 10 kids to a birthday party and only buying 1 pizza. Buy more than 1 pizza. Make sure there's enough pizza for your caterpillars. This to me is it's a really special plant. This is Our Lord's Candle. This is found all over Southern California. This is a very special plant to me personally. It's one of my top 3 plants. This is not a super amazing pollinator plant. It only flowers once in its lifetime. It takes about 5 to 10 years to flower. But when it does, the California yucca moth will get in there and pollinate. It's so pretty. And it's a very special plant to me. I think there's a lot to be said about a plant that will only flower once in its lifetime and then die. That's not an annual, right? We expect that of annuals, but this is a long-lived perennial. And I have a lot of traditions and stories connected to that plant. Go into a desert plant, which I don't want to cover too many desert plants because there's, I don't really think they belong here in Southern California. I think they're beautiful and a lot of them are easy to grow in Southern California. But this is one that I'll maybe accept because it's not very weedy and it grows everywhere, even by the coast. And I've never seen this guy reseed aggressively. So I think it's a safe plant to plant here in Southern California, and it tolerates the hottest conditions. It's a really pretty desert plant. And another one that we'll be giving away at Tarzana is Eriogonum cinerea, which is ashy leaf buckwheat. These are the plants I think we need to start promoting more. This is a very 805 boy. This is Ventura County, LA County, and I think Orange County. It's very, very local, very coastal. But what we found is this guy doesn't mind inland heat. We grew it well in Claremont when I was out there at Rancho Santa Ana. Claremont got 118 degrees a few years ago. So this plant, for whatever reason, loves the coast, but it doesn't mind the heat. And I think plants like this might have a really strong future in Southern California, not just by the coast, but moving inland or just adapting to the conditions as they get much, much hotter. I love this plant. And it's a late flowering plant. And one of the last ones is white sage. You can see the distribution of white sage. This guy will laugh at whatever heat comes its way in the next 10 to 20 years. And it's good because it's a very spiritual plant too. All these flowers attract bees and butterflies. It's a great pollinator plant, but it's also a really good story plant too. So I would encourage you guys to plant white sage because it's a really cool plant to attract pollinators, but to connect yourself to Southern California. And 2 more. Slender sunflower is a plant that I remember the exact first time I seen this plant. It took my breath away, and that's how much of a native plant dork I am. I let plants take my breath away, but this plant was in full flower when almost nothing else was. I seen this in full flower last September or October in a dusty area where everything else was dormant. This guy loves the summer heat, and it flowers at that time. It's kind of a fire follower. We treat the seed before we germinate it, and we get a lot better germination. But for some reason, it just loves being in chaparral and in some pine woodlands, and it loves 100-degree weather. It's a great late flowering sunflower. And the last one is Biopsis Licinata. This plant they're using like crazy in San Diego now, and I'm glad. It's such a pretty little plant. It's 2 to 4 feet tall and wide. It flowers almost all year if you're giving it a little bit of supplemental water, which is 2 to 3 times a month. Really good pollinator plant. Yeah, just super easy to grow, fast, full size in like 2 years. And I hope they use this plant a lot more in local gardens because we deserve to use it. It's such an easy plant to grow. And so there's my list again of things you can do and things you can stop doing. But I think because of time, I wanted to check in with Sharon or Diana and see what kind of things we might be able to address and cover.
Dude, it's 8:20. We have to stop.
I went far. Well,
This would be a great time if we could shift to the Q&A portion. Are you okay with that, Antonio? Some great information. Let me just say a couple of things first. I've turned the chat back on, so if you have a question, go ahead and enter it in the chat, and then we'll be picking out some questions. Also, if you can't stay, because we will be going over a little bit here, but you have something to announce, feel free to put that in the chat. Tell us what's going on and when, and if there's a link or something so that we can at least have that. And then we'll sort of cut our announcement shorter tonight. Sharon, do you want to kick it off with some questions?
Sure. I will ask the first question while others enter their questions in the chat. So one question I have is that suppose you have, a non-native plant in your yard, but it's flowering and you see, tons of bees drinking from it and other pollinators enjoying it. I mean, do you think we should leave the non-native plants that pollinators are enjoying or remove them and replace them with natives?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's a hard one to answer. So here's my answer. Does that plant take up a lot of resources, right? So it doesn't need a lot of water, doesn't need a lot of fertilizer. Is it possibly invasive? And most plants that we have in our garden aren't. And so if that's the case, there's a ton of research that shows that non-native plants attract native insects like crazy. We don't know how good that is for them though. We can use the Monarch as an example. We know that the Monarch loves tropical milkweed, and just because it loves tropical milkweed doesn't mean it's good for it. Like this is with my kids. Like I could put like a bowl of ice cream, I could put some frijoles and some cactus in front of them. They'll eat both, but they're gonna go to one first. And the Monarchs always go to the tropical milkweed first. And so we know that it's possible. It seems there's some research, there's not a ton of it. It seems like there's some research, or not seem, there is some research that shows that the chemical, the alkaloid that's in the tropical milkweed is a little different than the one that's in the native milkweed. And so it's possible that the Monarch is not getting the same nasty taste that it has in it as a caterpillar when it eats the tropical milkweed than when it eats the local milkweed. And so it is possible, there's, like I said, there's not a ton of research on it, that eating the tropical milkweed makes that caterpillar easier to digest to birds. And so for me, if there's ever a toss-up like that, I would just go with the native plant. So I don't really encourage people to remove their non-natives if they're low water and if they don't take a lot of inputs. But the one that we really are trying to encourage people to remove is that tropical milkweed. And it doesn't have to be overnight. What we want people to do is we want them to cut it down, because the other problem with that is that the tropical milkweed doesn't go to sleep here in Southern California. It just stays awake all winter, November, December, January, February. It doesn't want to go dormant. Our native milkweeds go dormant almost every year, no matter what. That's just what they do. That's what they've done for probably thousands of years. And so there's no need to be awake as a milkweed if the monarchs are asleep. But these tropical milkweeds stay awake and harbor this disease because they never died to the ground. And so we're finding that there's this disease. I forget what the little insect, the little pest is called. But if that milkweed never dies to the ground, never can come up and basically cleanse itself, we see that that's a really easy way for it to pass that disease on from generation to generation, from caterpillar to caterpillar, from monarch to monarch. So at the worst, we want you all to cut your milkweed down. November usually comes up by mid-December, late December, cut it down again, and then cut it down one more time in February. We don't want those tropical milkweed up. And then usually March 1st, we can let them come up, because that's when our narrow leaf milkweed comes up. So that would be the only one that I would tell people to remove. And the other one, I think it's a matter of how many inputs and how invasive can that plant be.
Antonio, do you need to be showing your slide right now? I'm just thinking if you could stop screen share, then we could ask questions to you directly. I don't know if you need it. There might be something on it you want to show us, like your website or anything, but
if I could leave this one up, just in case people want to help us out at the nursery or have more questions, my email's right at the bottom right there.
Okay, that sounds good. One of the questions that came in, this is from Isabel. She said, if we, a group of volunteer amateur native plant people, want to introduce beneficial species, how can we get expert support? So for example, they're in Venice, they want to plant buckwheat for a blue butterfly, but they're not sure which coastal buckwheat to plant. Where can they turn for that expert support?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you guys probably know that the story behind that buckwheat. I used to work where they did some of that work. So that blue butterfly will only, well, not only, but its host plant is Eriogonum parviflorum, which is the that coast buckwheat. And they made a mistake and they planted that, and they planted California buckwheat as well. And they found that the butterfly, the caterpillar, would not eat from that California buckwheat. They had to go back and pull all that California buckwheat out, even though California buckwheat occurs within a few miles of that spot. That's how specific that parviflorum is. That coast buckwheat is so that is so host specific, that butterfly. So I would say that I think a good place to start would be with me, and I probably won't end up helping you. not because I won't, but I think there's people way better connected than me and way more knowledgeable. But the thing that I might be good at is connecting you to those folks. I can connect you to maybe a land manager at Palo Verde Peninsula, or maybe one of the conservation managers. And I think we'd be willing to help you out to get started. And then, you know, we could probably consult with you as time allows. But I would be happy, you know, that species, that I'm good. I could help you 100% out with that species and connect you with who's done the work on that one.
Great, thank you. We're going to rotate here between Sharon, myself, and Terry Saucier to ask and pull some of the questions out of the chat. So I'm going to pitch it to Terry, and we'll just each ask a question and try to get through as many as we can in the next several minutes here.
Right, Antonio. So Cindy was asking about the seed bombs and where you get these, how you make them, and where best to use them. And I'm quite curious about those as well.
Yeah, so the 100% plain truth is that these seed bombs are almost useless. They are a way to get folks their hands dirty. We educate them about their species that we're using. We tell them that they're locally collected, and then we ask them to never use them in wild areas ever. We ask them to put them in their garden, and unless you're tending them, they're not going to come up. And so I wish that we could just say that it was just some lettuce and tomato and poppies and just throw them wherever you want. But the fact is that most of those seed bombs that are done are just never come up. It's just the seed. That's just not how nature works. If you guys could see how California poppies seed in 1 year, how many seed they produce, and then the next year, how many seed they produce, and how much seed is in a seed bank, how long it takes for something to germinate. It's amazing. There's stuff out there in our mountains that we haven't seen in 50 years. And when the conditions are right, they'll come up. And so to expect a seed bomb to come up that year, you need to have all the conditions correct. And so we go over that when we give these seed bombs to people. You need to have seed and soil connect. They need to touch each other. You need to have water. So you need to keep that seed germinated or wet. And then once it germinates, you need to keep it wet. And so these seed bombs are a fun way for us to get people in to using native plants, but by no means do we expect, or we don't want them to throw them out in native nature. And we expect very few of them to be successful in their landscapes.
Okay, I'll take the next question. We have a couple people who are asking what they can do to help if, say, you live in an apartment or a living situation where you don't have a big yard to plant in. What advice do you have for people who only have a small planting space?
Yeah, so we're gonna have a whole class, a 25-minute presentation during that Milkweed conference about no garden, no problem. But the easy answer is that we can do a ton in pots. We can do a ton in containers. And sometimes native plants are easier to grow in containers than they are in landscapes, because we can dictate what soil's in a container. We can dictate sometimes the sun, you know, the shade that they get, etc. So I would go, if you don't have a chance or you want to do it right now, you can email me and I can give you the formula, the soil formula. I can give you 5 to 10 real quick plants that will be very successful in pots. But the one big thing to remember in pots is that the soil, the plant is going to eat up the fertilizer real quick, or the nutrients. Native plants in the ground almost never need fertilizer. In pots, they almost always need fertilizer. And we can do organic fertilizer, so it doesn't have to be, super high input, but they do need a little bit of fertilizer. And if you can do that, then you can get them to flower a lot longer than they usually do in native nature.
I don't know if you are looking at the chat at all, but everybody is just commenting on how wonderful this presentation is, Antonio.
Oh, right on. That's cool. Thank you, guys.
More
I
than happy
appreciate
to
that.
share that with you so we can do all the kudos. Someone on our call is in the process of building a new house in Santa Clarita. There'll be no yard when they move in, just dirt. So there's an opportunity to design a native yard from scratch. Any recommendations about how to go about this? I'm in the same boat. They're going to be moving in late June, but the concept of if you're starting from scratch, where do how do you go about it? I saw somebody was doing some design, gravity something VR to design it, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, if you could afford it, it could be very expensive. If you can afford it, there's a lot of great, very, very experienced. There have always been some experience, but now there's a lot of them. Experienced landscape architects, landscape designers that could probably help you out. And if not, I would go, whenever you do designs, simplest design kind of sounds like too easy. But the simpler, the better. The more complex it gets and the more different plants you add and all that, it can get really, really wacky with water requirements and part shade. And if you can stick to about 7 to about 12 species and just do those species, I think it's a lot easier. If you go to that UC Davis All-Star website, they have a design template using All-Stars. And so you could see what the square footage is and how they would recommend. It just uses the UC Davis plant list. So there are a few websites out there that have, these free designs, and they show you the plants. And if it's a new development, it's probably like a rectangular front yard. So you could probably just take that design and almost plug it into to your spot.
Good.
And then we have a question from David. He says he has a lot of bottle brush in his yard. And he's wondering if that's non-native. And it says it does do well, though, doesn't need much water. And it does attract hummingbirds and bees. And so he was just curious if this is an invasive, non-native.
We don't consider bottle brush invasive, no. Bottle brush, if it's the one that, well, there's probably hundreds of them on the market. If it's the non-native bottle brush, I think they're from Australia. I think they're all from Australia. They're phenomenal plants. They fit all the requirements. They feed a bunch of, like he said, hummingbirds. They're great hummingbird plants. They're beautiful trees. They can be pruned into small shrubs too. So they meet all those requirements. They don't spread. They take low water. They're not considered fire risk. So while I wouldn't recommend you keep planting those, hopefully you could go with like a food plant. If you're going to plant a shrub that big, I might go with a low water food plant or a native plant that's the same size. But there's no reason to take it out at all.
We have some people who are wondering about the fact that, we want to plant for animals and pollinators and create habitat, but at the same time, it's discouraging to plant something and have the bunnies just mow it all down the first few weeks. How do we find the balance between, planting for wildlife and, discouraging some wildlife from eating everything that we plant?
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good question. I mean, so what we're doing at the park, and it's working great, is we have we're buying these old, well, not old, they're unused like soy milk containers, if you guys could imagine those. And they're probably misprints, or maybe they went out of stock or whatever. And we get them at 15 cents a piece. And we use those to basically cage our plants. And once the plants get big enough, we'll take them off. Once you take them off, the rabbits will probably go to town on them. But that's a way to at least, cage them for a while. There is a lot to be said for caging specific plants if the bunnies are really going to town on them. They're probably only eating the small, soft perennials, so like yarrow and like heucheras and things that are like 18 inches tall. So probably the woodier stuff like rosemary, lavender. A lot of our native sages are in that same boat. So some of the woodier, more aromatic plants they will probably stay away from. So you might want to try some of those. Like Nepeta, that's a catmint from the Mediterranean. That's a great pollinator plant that I don't think the bunnies would hit just because it's basically like catnip. You might get cats. You can actually find cats getting high on that plant. But yeah, if bunnies are a problem, I might try aromatic or slightly woodier things. And as a last resort, if you want, we have had a lot of success using a product called Bobex. And you can make something similar in your home, which is basically rotten eggs and like chili oil, and it smells horrible. And when we use it, we haven't used it in over a year, but when we use it, we usually get one of our underpaid interns to spray it, and it's rough. It is pretty brutal, but it does it works. You just have to keep applying it every 7 to 10 days because it will wear off.
We have time for just a few more questions. One is about planting milkweed in Santa Monica Mountains. Are you planting, and is anyone monitoring whether they're attracting monarchs for breeding?
Yeah, so we're not monitoring. What we're doing right now is we are planting 100%. We're planting. We're going to start planting in March. In case I didn't make it clear, the milkweed should be planted in March with the warm weather. This narrow leaf milkweed. What we're doing right now is we're identifying new locations. So we're out there scouting for all 3 species and we're mapping it. And so we're starting to develop this map of the parks of where the milkweed is. And we haven't considered, tracking the monarchs yet, maybe because we're not insect experts. We're more like nursery plant people. But that would be interesting. I don't think we've ever thought about that. What we really wanted to do is just plant more milkweed, find it, and then collect seed and then give it out to the public. Our goal is to hit 1,000 households this year with milkweed seed or milkweed plants, and we're going to reach it. That's a really interesting thought, and yeah, we might consider doing that. I'm not even sure how we would do that with the staff that we have, but with that grant that we have that you saw Leslie and Ashley, we're going to hire 2 more folks this year to do the exact same thing. So I'll put that on my notes of stuff that we might be able to do. Whoever asked that question, if they would want to help out, we could definitely take some help.
Great.
Christy asked a good question about, are there native food plants?
Oh yeah, that's California had the largest population of native folks north of Mexico City. So we're damn right there's food plants. They're everywhere. I have a native food class, which if you guys would like, I would be happy to give to you all, because it is local food and it's very low input. I have right here, can you guys see this? This is a mesquite cookie right here that my family made a few days ago. So this is mesquite flour, pine nuts, chia, and it's vegan. So we use like a vegan egg replacement. But some of the foods that the easiest foods to use, I'll give you 3. The ribes aureum, so the golden currant, which we're gonna give away in Tarzana. Basically, it's like a blueberry. If you think of how big a blueberry is, 3 to 6 feet tall, full sun to part shade. It doesn't need the acid soil that blueberries need, so that it's about that big. The second one is miner's lettuce. It's a very easy annual, very easy to grow in winter and spring. Easy to eat, tastes just like a soft lettuce. It's so delicate. And the third one is probably hummingbird sage. You can fry the leaves. You can blend the leaves with honey and make hummingbird sage honey, or you can make a tea out of the leaves. So what we like to do is we like to introduce the plants to people, like what you guys are doing. So we can get people into plants through combating or adapting to climate change. We can get people in native plants through food. We can get people into plants through monarchs. There's so many ways to get people into plants, and food is probably the easiest to do. So we do have Hummingbird Sage for free at the nursery. You just have to show up to the nursery and donate a few of your hours, and we have a bunch of that plant. That's probably our most popular plant.
Thank you.
Yes, and I will point out that anyone can go and volunteer for a few hours at Antonio's nursery on a Friday or Saturday, and then you get to take home free plants. This is how I've populated my yard, people.
I planted
All right.
7 milkweeds, so I'm growing.
All right, I'll ask the last question since I think we're about out of time, but someone wanted to know if Bladder Pod is available at common nurseries. Can you find it at Home Depot? And does it need a better name because it doesn't sound very attractive?
I've never seen Bladder Pod no, I've never seen it at Home Depot or Lowe's. I've seen probably about 20 native plants in those areas, and I've never seen that one. It's available for free at our nursery. It's one that we're giving away in Tarzana. You can take 3 if you just help us out. But I know Theodore Payne grows it a lot. All the native plant nurseries sell it to one degree or another. There's about 50 native plants that are always available in these native plant nurseries. Deergrass, Penstemon, Margarita Bob, like Junkus, Hummingbird Sage, and Bladder Pod is towards the end of that list. It's not the first one that's available, but it's always available at most of these native plant nurseries. And yes, I think it does need probably a better name, but yeah, I don't know. Like maybe we can name it after like a Bitcoin or something, like Bladder Coin. There we go. Bladder. Oh, that's even worse.
This is great. Well, I feel like, as you said, when we got started, Antonio, we probably could be at this until 10 o'clock tonight, but we do need to wrap it up just to respect everyone's time. So I just want to thank you so much. A lot of people in the chat said, yes, 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 please, to the native foods class. Maybe we should try to figure out how to do a follow-up or part 2 that may not be part of our main chapter meeting, but I think we'd have a ton of people interested in hearing you speak more on this. So if you're game for something like that, Antonio, maybe we can just keep this conversation going. What do you say?
Yes, for sure. You guys can see my right here, my little cursor. There's my email. If you guys want to find out when we're doing free events or more about the milkweed and what else was I gonna say? Yeah, whenever you guys need me, as long as it works, I'm there. That's yeah, I think you guys would love the energy that the parks has right now. We have so many great people, and there's a lot of hope right there. A lot of folks just teaming up to do, positive work. So if you guys can do it, just join us.
Antonio, the next 1 or 2 available volunteer opportunities. I know you have some time slots like Paramount Ranch Restoration. Is that a Saturday morning, 8 to 11? Or
yeah, everything's
give us a couple of options that people can respond to.
Yeah, so everything's on on SAMO Fund Eventbrite. I know we're taking volunteers at the nursery on Friday. The Saturday is already sold out. And then the next time we'll take volunteers at the nursery will be next Friday, next Saturday. And then I think there's restoration going on next Friday and next Saturday as well.
Right.
Probably in Chesbro or Paramount.
It's a great experience to go and do it. People are fun and you learn a lot. So thanks again, Antonio. Everybody just show your appreciation either in the chat or claps, hugs, everything. Thank you so much. I really appreciated how you dialed that in for us on climate. In addition to native plants, it made it very meaningful. Thank you.
Right on. Thanks for inviting me, Sharon. I'll see you soon. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right, you guys, have a good night and take good care.